Hello and welcome to a conversation that's actually going to be focusing on the top emerging trends in agriculture and open spaces for innovations in India. And basically, what can be done with a view, with a focus on the small farmer, the marginal farmer, the women who are involved in farming activities also. To discuss this, today, I have a panel of experts. I have with me Anil Kumar SG. He is the founder and the CEO of Sunmati. He's also been a banker with 27 years of experience behind him. He's been working with Canara Bank, ICICI, and IFMR. At the IFMR, he designed and deployed a financial institute model called Kshetriya Grameen Financial Services. And after this did pretty well, this model, Anil has also promoted his own organization, Sanumati, which is an agri-finance with a special focus on smallholder farmers ever since 2014. We have Mark Khan. He is the managing partner at Omnivore. He's also the co-founder of Omnivore with Jinesh Shah in 2010. Previously, Mark was the executive VP, basically focused on strategy and business development at Godrej Agrovet. Which is one of India's most foremost diversified agribusiness companies. At Godrej Agrovet, he was also responsible for corporate strategy, R&D, mergers and acquisition, and new business incubation. He's a member of the CII and the National Council of Agriculture, and also a member of the Governing Council of Maharashtra State Innovation Society. Joining us is Sudha Srinivasan. She is the CEO at Nudge Center for Social Innovation, which is basically an impact stream of the Nudge Foundation, whose mission is to nudge and nurture top talent to solve India's most critical problems. Prior to Nudge, Sudha worked at Intel, where she spent about 13 years in various leadership roles, defining and executing large-scale global programs. Her passion is to enable organizations to ramp up scale and also to achieve, very audacious goals. She's an engineer by training and holds an MBA from the IIM Lucknow. So that we've all of us have really got together on this platform to discuss a very noble cause, and also a cause that is politically very topical today in keeping the farm reform laws. But we're not going to go into the politics of it. Our focus is really the small farmer, the marginal farmer, the women farmer. And if you can just help us lay out exactly the discussion that the focus of today's conversation, Sudha.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Priya. Lovely to be here.
Yeah.
So like you said, we started out with a mission to nudge and nurture India's top talent to solve our most critical developmental challenges. As you see, every sector has been disrupted by startups, and there's a lot of talent solving lucrative problems, very important ones, but still only lucrative problems. And there's this whole range of issues at the base of the pyramid affecting basic quality of life for India's underprivileged sections of society. And there's very little happening there. So we kind of started to activate that space and say, can the development sector also attract talent, which in turn will unlock other levers like innovation, capital, and political will, and accelerate our pace towards attaining our sustainability goals as well as our developmental goals.
Agriculture where social innovation enablers like Nudge come in, right?
Absolutely. We started as an incubator and an accelerator. We saw the opportunity to go a little more upstream and do an inducement grant challenge, something that will spotlight the space for what it is. Not just a space for empathy and charitable giving and philanthropy, but also for problem solving. Right? And there are so many of these social problems that technology can disrupt. Agriculture in particular stood out as that space. More than half of India's poor are engaged in some form of agriculture. The pathways out of poverty see roadblocks in the forms of social norms and lack of agency, lack of access, all of which technology has immense potential to disrupt. Be it very cutting edge technology to measure and establish the quality of produce, or precision technology to reduce the volume of inputs that go into the soil, which in turn later translates to ability of the farmer to sell, while meeting the standards of density of pesticides or whatever that's today preventing them from accessing better markets. The range of possibilities was very, very wide. But unfortunately, as you look at agtech investments in the last few years, a lot of it is customer proximate, right? Consumer proximate. There's almost a void in the farmer-centric space that puts the farmer at the center, right? And the livelihood at the center rather than just chase agricultural productivity and food security as goals. So we said, let's see if India's entrepreneurs can be as audacious as, say, our Indian cricket team and take on these challenges and truly disrupt the space. So that's kind of what got us started. And Cisco came on board as partners. The Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor, Government of India, gave us their blessing. And we reached out to Mark and Anil and several others, got the confidence to get started in this relatively new space for us.
Thank you, Sudha. In fact, it's a challenge that is really, not just audacious, but a noble one, I would say, a challenge for the times, as I said earlier. Right. So, Mark, Sudha spoke, she focused on that we would really look at the emerging trends and how to help those, who don't have access to these kind of innovations. So what are the emerging trends in agri-tech, both India and globally that you see of late?
Sure. So the one thing that I would qualify in terms of Sudha's statements is things are much better now than they used to be. We've been at this for a decade. At the time that we started Omnivore in Bombay in 2010, the amount of investment coming into agri-tech startups annually in India was sub $15 million a year. This past 12-month period, we've probably crossed $600 million. So it's been up and to the right over the course of the last decade and is infinitely better than it was earlier. When we talk about kind of the trends that we're seeing globally and in India, what I would say is that the global agri-tech is very, very different from Indian agri-tech. I actually think Indian agri-tech is in some ways better positioned than what we see globally. The biggest trend that we see in Indian agri-tech is basically digital aggregation, right? Digital outreach, building a base layer of digital connectivity that reaches farmers, that reaches mandis, that reaches artiyas, that reaches intermediaries where there was nothing before, right? The defining characteristic of Indian agriculture is the fragmentation. It's the fact that you have 130 million farmers farming an average landholding of just slightly more than 1 hectare. Right? No other nation in the world really has that. And that this system, right, of hyper-fragmentation with everything that goes along with it, right? So if you think about all the debates we're having from a policy perspective about our mandi system, if you think about our dairy economy, right, which instead of working with large dairy farms like everywhere else in the world, aggregates at village collection centers because the average dairy holding, right, is 2 or 3 animals because we have 80 million dairy farmers and 300 million head of cattle, right? Fragmentation, disaggregation, right, is the defining feature of our system. And what's powerful is that between 4G, smartphones, right, and just generally the radical reduction in the cost of digital technologies, we now have the ability to build a base layer to reach all of these disparate groups. And that is not to say that every farmer has a smartphone. They don't, okay? But, if we take one of our portfolio companies, DeHaat, as an example, DeHaat is reaching now about 6 lakh farmers and doesn't reach all of them directly, but has a person in every village that has a DeHaat center that has a smartphone. And so you've got, what they say is phygital, right? Physical and digital coming together in a way where outreach becomes possible. This is, the big trend that is defining Indian agri-tech. It's all very digitally centric. if we go, and it's operating in a system that has all of these challenges. We always at Omnivore say there are three big challenges in Indian ag: the challenge of profitability, the challenge of resilience, and the challenge of sustainability. And all of these are being addressed, right, with the building of this base layer. When you go to the West, you have to remember that you're dealing with probably the world's most efficient agricultural system. Okay, you've got massive average farm holdings, right? Very, very thin margins, right, for everyone in that ecosystem. And so agri-tech in the West, I actually think is much less interesting. Agri-tech in the West, to be clear, has a couple other characteristics. There is a hell of a lot more life sciences, right? If I look at our peer funds, right, S2G, Cultivian, Antera, Finisteer, what Omnivore is in India, the equivalents in Canada and the US and Israel, 50% of their portfolios are in the life sciences, right? 5% of ours is. We don't even see life science startups in India. I've gotten in trouble for saying this, but there are more Desis doing innovative life science research in 3 kilometers of Boston than in the entirety of the subcontinent, in terms of the bleeding edge of life sciences, in terms of the game-changing stuff. So we don't see that in our portfolio for the most part. You also see a lot more robotics being developed in the West. We've actually, along with Bloom and BNext, backed one of the only Indian agri-robotic startups, a company called Tartan Sense. But generally, you're talking about very, very different ecosystems.
Which I think Mark has already answered a lot of it, but how do you see agri-tech helping the small and marginal farmer, or are they really still to get into this, get their share of this pie? What are the access to technology for the small farmers? Anil?
Okay. Shara, the moment you get into agriculture, first, wonderful to be on the panel, good to be among friends.
Good to have you here.
And thanks for the opportunity. The moment you get into agriculture and talk about smallholder farmers, there are 2 dimensions, Priya. Dimension number 1 is the smallholder dimension, which is where the rubber meets the road. All of these initiatives culminate at the farmer. Dimension number 2 is the sector as a whole, the horizontal, the expanse of what agriculture is as a sector. Now, making the horizontal and vertical is where the entire benefit to the smallholder farmer would accrue over a period. Before getting into how technology is going to help the farmer, I'll digress a little bit and also share what is defining this period. I completely agree with both Sudha and Mark in saying that things have changed significantly in India over the last few years, especially in the last 5 years. In addition to the capital inflows that Mark mentioned, there is a significant buoyancy at an ecosystem level. Not only the entrepreneurial energy that we are seeing, but also the kind of enablers that the ecosystem is seeing have not been observed. Because I have spent about 21 years of my professional experience in banking in the rural areas. Rural and agri are 2 sides of the same coin. So there is a lot of energy that I am witnessing or we are seeing in the entire ecosystem. The moment you see this energy in the ecosystem, there are 2 dimensions. One is each one of us or several of the entities that are operating in this space are looking at addressing 1 or 2 critical parts of this ecosystem, agriculture, which they believe to be fundamental to change the life of a smallholder farmer. And that focuses on the vertical part of it. Somebody is looking at satellite imagery, somebody is looking at quality assaying, somebody is looking at robotics in terms of the monitoring. And there are also entities which are looking at horizontal. How can we be a full stack? How can we be aggregators of all of these individual dimensions? A collaboration of this horizontal and vertical is what will bring technology and its benefit to the smallholder farmer. And I often mention in these discussions that for a smallholder farmer to take the benefit of a technology, the attribution and the result of the technology contributing to 100 rupees, 200 rupees in their pocket is an important dimension. how can technology translate into an upliftment in the livelihood is single largest factor that will determine the adoption rates. But the beauty of an ecosystem being active would also mean the smallholder farmer need not be the sole entity that should adopt these technologies. There are players in between who can also play the role of making these technologies useful for them to access the smallholder farmers. Right? And the moment we take this ecosystem view is when technology adoption can happen at mainstream institutions like insurance companies and banks, which are using satellite imagery to monitor the crop real-time online. Technology adoption at the FPO level, where they are looking at digitizing their operations as well as creating the geofencing and the geotagging of farmers and their members and so on and so forth. And ultimately the technology adoption at the smallholder farmer, where they can look at how do they increase the income to a delta that the technology can bring in. The moment an ecosystem reverberates with this technology is when there are efficiencies in the pre-harvest as well as post-harvest dimension, thereby making the entire sector operate at a higher equilibrium. And that is what we are seeing in the last few years. It's just not smallholder farmers. It's just not crop loans. It is the entire ecosystem that is seeing the buoyancy.
So that you want to come in on this, specifically the agri-tech sector? Have you seen it really permeating on the ground, or are there any apps or social innovation enablers that you would like to highlight that have been very effective in your point of view?
Significant. I will go with the names that Mark has taken. Dehat is a fantastic example of a full stack approach, very similar to Samunnati, but they started off in Bihar. A market that is fantastic in terms of the execution, and then they are focusing on the entire eastern market, in which they have taken a full stack approach of technology all the way to the smallholder farmers through the local neural networks. Okay. Again, the other company that Mark took, Tartan Sense, is looking at robotics for crop assessment and the yield and things like that. And the gentleman that Mark thankfully connected me to, the founder of Tartan Sense, is from the US, a mechanical engineer, has been there, done that, and is back in India to solve a very, very important problem. Right? So you are seeing entrepreneurs who have left lucrative careers coming in here to make their expertise matter to smallholder farmers.
So some of those Boston guys are heading back, Mark, maybe.
No, Boston is life sciences. They are still away.
Yeah. No, these are Indian guys who went to Carnegie Mellon, right? Okay. This is the rub in terms of life sciences, is that the digital talent pipeline between India and the world, the managerial talent pipeline, hardware, software, FMCG, people come, people go. The problem in life sciences is it's like what digital was in the 80s. It's a one-way street. So. But just to kind of build on what Anil was saying, I think one of the things that's very interesting for us in our journey is, if you look at the different kinds of business models that were possible over time, right? So and we've seen all of them over this decade. When we first started investing in this space, pretty much everything we did fell into two major buckets. One was innovative hardware that was at a price point where a smallholder farmer could afford it, but still, right, it was enough that you could afford to build out a distribution system. Okay, so if you look at deals that we did a long time ago, Mitra was a great example. Now it's owned by Mahindra, right? They made precision sprayers, right? Something that would cost 2 lakh. Right, farmers spend 5 lakh on a tractor, buys this for 2 lakh. Not always a farmer, sometimes an entrepreneur. That was an example of kind of early stuff we did. Or if it was digital, it was all about B2B digital, right? So we backed, or what we used to call B2B to F, business to farmer, because you couldn't reach farmers directly and digitally in 2013 and 14. So if you look at Stellapps, which has grown very, very well, Stellapps reached farmers not directly, but by partnering with cooperatives and private dairies like, say, Hatson, and then they could reach out to those farmer communities and digitize that ecosystem. What is possible now, because of smartphones, right? And smartphone penetration. And as I said, right, smartphone penetration is probably 20, 25%, but it varies dramatically, right? If you go into aquaculture, we have a portfolio company, Aqua Connect, smartphone penetration is probably north of 90%, right? Because those tend to be more progressive farmers in areas that have better connectivity. By definition, those are the zones where you find aquaculture. But I think the most interesting example is we recently backed a company that was unthinkable even a few years ago. It's called Animal, Animall. Okay. It has two female founders who both grew up in rural India. One literally with cows and buffaloes in her living room. Her father was a dairy farmer. The other, right, in rural Rajasthan, and the other in Haryana. They met first day IIT Delhi, right? Kept each other alive through 4 years at IIT, went on to have some early career experience in other startups, in this case with Neetu Pratalipi, and now have founded a digital dairy farming platform that is helping dairy farmers across India connect with each other to trade cattle, which is a very opaque ecosystem, providing dairy extension and soon many, many other things. But the point is every one of those customers has a smartphone. Now, India has 80 million dairy farmers. How many of them have smartphones? I don't know, 20 million, probably 25. I would say on average it's probably a little bit higher. But that may be offset by by some other cultural factors in other places. So let's say we're talking about 20 million farmers. It's a lot to work with, right? And that number is going up every year. And this sort of direct connect, which was not possible even 4 years ago, we're now seeing more and more of.
So that you want to comment on any of these social innovation apps or enablers that you feel have really done well?
Sure. So at the risk of sounding super corny, I'm going to put a farm analogy here.
Okay, I think that's just about right.
The entrepreneur is the seed that will give rise to the startup, which we hope someday will solve population scale problems in a meaningful way. But to Anil's earlier point, it needs the conditions for growth, right? You need the right soil conditions, the atmospheric conditions, the sunshine, the air quality. And that's the ecosystem, right? And I think it's amazing to see the optimism in the tone of both what Mark and Anil have said. Definitely the last the last decade has been very, very progressive on that front. But I was kind of looking through the Think Ag report just before, and one of the things that stands out is the low density of single deals in the whole inventory of deals that they have compiled over the last 10 years, right? So it's the first time deals. A lot of deals are repeat deals for subsequent stages of growth of the organization, right? It's more in the growth and scale up stage. Early stage funding is still very scarce, right? Particularly for organizations that have a long gestation period on becoming economically successful. It feels like the early stage investment ecosystem is still very sparse. And that's kind of where I think, Priya, you were alluding to the social entrepreneurship ecosystem more in the early stages. Incubators across the country, starting out from the universities where catch them early kind of opportunities start to emerge for particularly in the digital space for engineering graduates more than in the agricultural universities, although that's also becoming very vibrant with ag hubs across the country. It's very interesting to see the emergence of these incubators, the emergence of the whole chain of funding from very early stage, friends and family plus all the way to growth and scale up stage. And one of the things we sought to do was to create this platform of discovery, right? So much of the work happens in the hinterlands. Animal was a great example. For us to know about Animal, you need that platform, and this particular conversation being one such. But what the challenge is, curating is many such opportunities for entrepreneurs to discover each other, for them to discover funders that are aligned with their purpose and founding objectives, for funders to discover each other and kind of understand their investment thesis and kind of align on their deal pipes. Most importantly, access to experts and knowledge. Very interesting to see the kinds of universities that have come in, covering a very broad spectrum of know-how, right? From Wageningen in Netherlands to IRMA to IIM Bangalore to Purdue, that has a very engineering focus. We're kind of covering the spectrum of knowledge, resources, support systems required for early stage entrepreneurs just starting out on this very difficult journey, and solve for them things that take time, like getting access to their first 100 customers. And that's where you could spend years getting trust within communities and get adoption for your very radical idea. But a platform like this could cut down that time within a single year and really accelerate the pace at which you start becoming relevant in the sector. So very, very excited about being able to do that, and looking forward to this theory of change playing out as intended.
Okay. Yeah, Anil, Sudha mentioned funding. I think that's why we get our banker on the panel to come in. Funding at the early stages of the incubation, how is that improved over the years also?
I actually would want to pick up what Sudha mentioned about the repeat deals adding up to a big number and unique deals not too large. That is one way to look at things, Sudha. The other way of looking at is the number of incubations that have mushroomed. If you see the life cycle of an entity reaching up to a stage of being able to get seed funding, there is incubation. I'm glad you touched the incubators. There is proof of concept, then there is production capability, and then demonstrate a reasonable scale is when you get into the equity space. And the same ThinkAg report also talks about more than 2,000 startups in agriculture in various forms and shapes. I think from a banker's perspective, Priya, where there is some distance to cover and there is a significant gap is actually not in the equity funding at seed stage, but it is in working capital. There are many entities which don't need equity, but need working capital to be able to deploy their solution, product, or technology to the intended users, which often are smallholder farmers or the FPOs or farmer collectives. And some of these entities really struggle because the way a debt funder looks at is still very traditional, is still very rudimentary. They would basically look at the vintage of the activity, the financial returns and the profitability, so on and so forth. But the technology in agriculture space itself is very young. You cannot expect a technology company in agriculture to have demonstrated a vintage of deploying their operations and showing a sustainable financial records. That's not available yet. And we at Samounnati launched a platform called Samaram only for startups on 15th of August 2020. And in the last 4 months that the platform is live, and the platform basically is only for startups in agriculture and ag tech companies with 3 dimensions, and you can apply for all the 3. One is working capital for them. Second is whether they require mentoring. And third dimension is whether they would need access to the customers that Samounnati has for them to deploy their product, service, or technology. We have got about 160 genuine applications in the 4 months. 50% of them, about 73 of them, require working capital. And what kind of working capital? Confirmed orders. They don't require working capital for for something that they need to build out. There is seed money available or angel money available, or they are ready to bootstrap as well. But then if there is a confirmed order, which is usually large, how do they access working capital for the confirmed order is the other dimension. So there is a need for a early stage debt, a venture debt, so on and so forth. And that is another market that we are seeing a lot of traction. Mm-hmm. And again, as a banker, I would also want to mention that finance is important, but not sufficient. Finance, when enabled with an integrated approach to market linkages, is when it becomes a complete proposition. And agriculture at this point in time requires a full stack approach, a complete proposition, not piecemeal.
Right. You want to comment on the funding question? Oh.
Yeah, my general reaction to all of this is, man, you should have seen what 2012 looked like, or 2016, or 2018. It is far easier today for an agri-tech startup to get funded than it has ever been in the history of funding agri-tech startups. Sure, a lot of the money that is going into the space is follow-ons, but that by definition, right, given the sort of logarithmic nature of funding, is going to be how that plays out, right? When your typical seed check is $2 million and your typical Series A is $10 million and your typical Series B is $20 or $30 million, by definition, or more, by definition, you're going to see larger rounds eat up a lot of what follow-on funding looks like. But I still think that
it's not just the volume of funding, it's also the count, the number of deals.
Yeah, I mean,
that's to be a funnel, right? You expect a lot more early stage deals, fewer follow-on deals, but it's kind of the donut, the hole in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, right, this will kind of happen in waves, right? You have to appreciate that in terms of funding sources, right? There are how many VC funds in India, right? I don't know, 30 or 40 that count, okay, that actually do a decent amount of deal flow, probably a little bit less, so how many of them are, I think it's a function of how many of them are going to take agri-tech bets, and then how many of them are going to take multiple agri-tech bets, right? So let's take Sequoia, for example. Sequoia, right, between its core fund and Surge, has taken now, right, DeHaat, they have taken Bijak, they have done Animal, they're doing another one that I'm aware of right now. Okay, but it's gonna be, I don't know, 1 or 2 a year. I don't think it's gonna be 10 a year, right? I think the point is that, if we take, Matrix, right? Matrix has done Vigro and one other, okay, that I'm aware of that may or may not be public. Excel has done someone up the right. They did Ninja Cart. They were an early big player in this space, AgroStar, and now Clover. But, how many do you expect a generalist VC is going to do year on year? I would expect 1 to 2, right? So honestly, yes, there is certainly room for more support for this space. There is certainly room for more funds to come up. But my expectation is you're going to see more and more funds do their first agri deal, get comfortable with it, do more. And it should, I would expect 12 months from now, right, we're seeing $700-800 million come into the space. 2 years from now, it might be $1 billion, right, as this becomes more mainstream. But this is never going to be as mainstream as EdTech, as mainstream as, as FinTech or other things.
Just moving on now, Mark, this is for you. What are the open spaces for innovation in agriculture? And can you also help us understand what exactly one means by open spaces?
So, I mean, I think there's a hell of a lot of open spaces. Whether, trying to generalize a system that includes 130 million cultivators and their families is folly. Right? It doesn't suit generalizations. I think there are opportunities, we like to summarize the opportunities. We have like a little 3x3 management consulting style, where we kind of talk about what we think of as most deals falling into one of those buckets, right? So we think a very, very big one is farmer platforms, right? And we're seeing those, whether those are big, well-funded farmer platforms like DeHaat, but also specialized farmer platforms that might be very, very, that are just in one area. Like we've backed one together with Strive called Resha Mandi, that's just focused on like silk. Okay, silk is a big space. Silk is 6 million farmers. It's billions of dollars of sales, right? But it's a targeted. Right, it's a targeted ecosystem. So farmer platforms is a big one. Agri B2B marketplaces, right? Not necessarily just organizing at the side of the farmer, but organizing the mandis, organizing the trade, right, is another big opportunity. Rural fintech is a huge opportunity, right? Where Samunati and Anil have been incredible pioneers, right? There is massive space to accelerate rural fintech penetration. We haven't done a lot of deals in this space, but you see a lot of what we call F2C, farm to consumer brands, right? A great example of that is Country Delight. Country Delight's got cows and farmers on one side and urban consumers on the other. Licious is similar. Fresh to Home is similar. More and more people want the food that comes to their homes, the fresh food, to come directly from farms, right? We've backed Clover, which is doing this in the horticultural space specifically, right? Protected greenhouses. There's plenty of deep tech, right? Whether it's pre-harvest or post-harvest precision agriculture. And hopefully eventually, as these platforms facilitate the migration of technologies, right, to farms, you'll start seeing more life sciences, more biotech, right? Because the cost of getting to market will become less prohibitive.
Adam, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I just want to add to what Mark is saying. In addition to all these open spaces and the kind of innovations that we are seeing, what we are also witnessing is a collaborative approach to many of these companies with focus on the smallholder farmers. Few examples that I can share is the collaboration between, say, Cropin and ICICI Bank in terms of monitoring the crop loans that ICICI Bank has given to individual farmers using a satellite imaging technology that we have from Cropin. The other significant collaboration that we are seeing is a large dairy company and Stellapse. There is a wonderful integration of the platform where they started with the number of additionalities, incrementalities that they have built to respond to both sides. The production side of milk as well as the processing side of milk is significant. And there is a beautiful collaborative environment that is approaching. So I was the other day mentioning in one of the panel discussions, the way I see the agriculture ecosystem now, Priya, in India is in a way akin to how the Silicon Valley was during the dot-com boom, where the larger entities were supporting the smaller entities and the smaller entities were looking at solving some of the niche problems of the larger entities. So tying it back to Sudha's point that there are more follow-on deals also do two things. One, it nurtures the entire ecosystem for more and more budding entrepreneurs to come in. Two, there is also an ability to pay for those services rather than incrementally building it, thereby cutting the cycle of innovation.
Right.
And that is an important dimension when the ecosystem as a whole gets the energy. So I'm tying up all the points. But yes, some of the fantastic examples that we are seeing, whether it is logistics, whether it is production, whether it is traceability, whether it is specific value chains, whether it is the quality testing, so on and so forth. And now we are seeing multiple entities in these pockets competing to give the best of the service here.
That is heartening. Sudha, your take on this and any of these innovations in open spaces that you want to nudge up for our viewers and listeners and highlight?
Sure. Unlike my friends here, I'm coming in from the social side of things more than the agriculture as a field in itself. Just zooming out, one thing to note is the changing demographic of rural India. It's largely starting to look like the two young women Mark described. There's a generational shift. Far more farmers today are digitally literate, have aspirations beyond doing what their parents did, right? The pandemic also showed us the exodus from the urban centers back to the villages. I think, although a lot of them might come back, we still need to look at India's development in a more distributed manner, right? Reduce the dependence on the urban centers and revitalize rural economies. Agriculture already is a labor surplus sector, right? So for me, the single biggest white space is the opportunity in near farm industries. Something that goes beyond the activity of sowing, tilling, reaping, harvesting, right? And kind of get beyond that to expand additional revenue streams for the farming communities. Build agency in a manner where the transfer of ownership from the farmer to the next player in the value chain can happen at a later stage, right? And that's how you capture the value that one saves by eliminating the middle layers between farm and consumer. And a lot of that is about building capacity, building skills, particularly entrepreneurial skills. On the government side of things, a lot of rural livelihood missions have put in place structures starting with a very small self-help group of women, but then also village level organizations and institutional structures beyond that roll up all the way to the SRLM, which is a wonderful vehicle to build this capacity. Right? So rural transformation overall beyond change in agriculture as a sector is poised for some very radical shifts and innovations. And I think agtech entrepreneurs have an amazing role to play to fructify that and make this whole thing respond to the calls of a triple bottom line, where you of course see huge economic returns, but you also see positive social outcomes and long-term environmental outcomes. So I'm very, very excited about these opportunities as well.
What can be done to encourage such, social innovation enablers, in different fields?
Look, I think a lot of it is happening on its own. But I think if we're looking at kind of proactive approaches to driving more talent into the space, I think outreach with the IITs and the IIMs is certainly an opportunity to get the best and the brightest into this space. I think if we look at the story of Animal, it came out of a hackathon at another startup called Pratilipi, right? So encouraging people to kind of think about how they could build, right? Especially people who have prior pedigrees in startups, I think goes a long way. I also think introducing, right, agri-tech exposure into the state agricultural universities, right, and the agri-focused MBAs would also be very helpful, right, at places like, at IRMA, at Manage, right, there are at Vamnicom. There are many agri and rural focused MBAs where we could do better outreach. And unfortunately, the state agricultural universities, which could be an incredibly active player in this ecosystem, really have lagged the IITs, which is completely and BITS Pilani, which is completely counterintuitive. But I think it's the fact that the entrepreneurial path, which is now honestly kind of the dominant, right, most esteemed path at the IITs and the IIMs, that's still not the case, right, at the SAUs. At the SAUs, it's all about, going to the US for your PhD, right, or getting into an agri MBA. And that mindset of starting up hasn't really spread there, but it will. I think it's really, it's about changing the talent pipeline more than anything, right? Startups are simply a function of talent, right? If you, and so if you want more agri startups, you want better agri startups, it's about getting more and better talent into the space.
Then you want to come in on this? What else can be done to encourage, the startups is one way, but how do you encourage them, say, financially?
Before getting into how we can encourage financially, Priya, I also would want to bring in the dimension of the transitory role that technology can bring in changing the visual of what agriculture would mean. Okay. The moment you say farmer and agriculture, what is the visual that we get? The visual that we get is a drudgery, an impoverished farming family, not making ends to meet, not getting a fair deal of what they are producing, and at the receiving end of everything. How can we make technology drive the youngsters into agriculture, and can we transition this visual to a young 28 something guy working with the gadgets in his farm, happy children running around, wife around, and mechanization happening, and making a productive yield out of agriculture. You see, these are two worlds. And the bridge to these two worlds is technology. And this technology would also be the incentive, would also be the catalyst for youngsters to move from a physical drudgery, which is what agriculture is in a manual sense, to a high-tech farming, which is where our country is moving. And I'm sure in the 4 or 5 years of time that if we can take that as a horizon, you will see many such farms coming in, and we are already seeing well-educated, professionally successful people taking up farming in the peripheries of urban areas.
But how does this play out, Anil, in terms of the labor? Won't there be fear of layoffs? The more technology comes in, the more, and that in the rural area is a much more viable concern.
No, there are multiple other benefits that would get. Agri-entrepreneurship is not mechanization. There are services, and there is a program called Agri-Entrepreneur Program of Syngenta Foundation. If the viewers if you are familiar with it, it is taking a 10th pass someone to train them in being the bridge between the world and the farmers in the local areas. They need not come out of the villages to be able to do that. So if you are able to harness this demographic dividend that we have, bring them back to a remunerative way, make agriculture an aspirational one, and state agri universities have an important role to play. IITs have an important role to play. Challenges like Cisco, the Agri Challenge will create a lot of energy around making agriculture aspirational, I would say.
Sudha, your take on this before we wrap up?
Finance.
Sorry, Anil. Yes.
Finance is an integral part of all of this. You cannot dealing. That's why finance is important, whereas it's not sufficient. It's an integral part of it. It is the thread that connects all the pearls. You require that for everything.
No arguments there, Sudha.
Right. So, I think +1 to what Anil said. The drudgery reduction should not be seen as layoffs, for the simple reason that you wouldn't say that if we were talking about manual scavenging, right? There are things humans should do, there are things humans should not do. And a lot of mechanization can take away the latter, right? And create these other opportunities, a higher order of opportunities that improve quality of life. India is very underinvested in near farm industries that, for instance, just food processing, for instance, is nowhere near global benchmarks in other developing countries in percentage terms. There's so much you can do with biomass and bio-waste that's today unrealized value. One of our incubators, Energy Harvest Charitable Trust, is kind of using AI to reduce the paddy straw burning and converting that into fuel pellets. Neo farm as a space itself just has so much opportunity. I don't think it's a concern in terms of what will the mechanization and efficiency gains from technology result in terms of where the the labor distribution happens. Very interesting to see the Syngenta Foundation kind of initiatives as well, I think. And GAME has been kind of collaborating with them as well. So mass entrepreneurship across the country in every sector, and particularly in the agricultural sector, is really promising to be the ground up stimulus that one needs. The data we hear so often on panels like this is how little agriculture contributes to GDP in percentage terms, right? You hear very large number of people working in agriculture, but percentage contribution to GDP is so low. That could very quickly reverse, right? With these kind of ground up stimuli. It may not count as agricultural income because of the way I think a bean counting happens, but net, you know that it has revitalized the rural economy in a manner that is unprecedented and really has the promise for, engaging 21st century youth in areas where their potential is realized.
And now, last words. I'll begin with you, Mark. What is the role that you see different stakeholders playing in order to make agriculture more innovative and more get a better ecosystem in place? Really.
Oh God, that's a sweeping question. I guess I can respond on what I would like as opposed to what I expect, because I don't expect most of this. I would like the government to create a standard set of rules that they stick with, right? Stabilize and allow an enabling environment that lets people make long-term investments and decisions. I would like Indian agri-corporates, right, to behave as partners, not predators, and actually work with startups rather than trying to gut them, copy them, right, or screw them. I would like universities to recognize, right, that agriculture is not just, right, say 15% of the GDP, but when we take all of the agribusiness associated with agriculture, when we take all of the food processing, the logistics, right, the financing, the insurance, everything that goes along with it, we're talking about a quarter of our economy and half our population, and appropriately focus on that with respect to the directions that they're pushing young people. Because honestly, if we don't get this right, India doesn't have a future. And I would like venture capitalists, which I increasingly believe is happening, to see the opportunity in this space and support it.
Anil, your wish list?
I would see many more integrative approaches, many more models that integrate wonderful work that is happening. Two, I would also see some shining examples of farmer collectives. If one Amul can inspire this country for decades, can we create few such lighthouses and the focus on FPO as a vehicle? The potential, this particular form of farmer collectives represents is a significant opportunity that we have. And how do we harness this opportunity? How do we harvest this opportunity is an important dimension. Significant departure from a FPO being a FPC to FPO being a FPO, which includes even some of the well-functioning cooperatives, is an important dimension. And a lot of policy focus would also mean many support structures coming in. How do we as private sector players participate, and how do we as private sector players get equal opportunity from the policy makers to participate would be an important dimension. Because we have to appreciate that now it's just not the state, it's just not the public sector. Private sector also can play a significant role in making these services reach the smallholder farmer. Can we be the partners in this growth story that we have the potential to write?
Okay. Thank you. That's very well scripted. Sudha, you are the social conscience of this panel, so I'm very scared to ask you for a wish list because I want to remind you there is a time frame, but your priority list rather.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough act to follow after what Mark and Anil have shared, but I'll limit it to one thing, which is probably to see the marketplace in agriculture and the whole supply chain of agriculture become more frictionless, right? More transparent, more accountable, more frictionless. The principles of free markets have helped every other sector, and this almost feels like a sector that has been kept. And I'm hoping that will change soon and enable a certain vibrancy to come from large numbers of players committing to look at the livelihood of farming and enhancing it. The second thing I have on my wish list is for entrepreneurs to peel the onion in agriculture a lot more. I think intuitively sitting in our relatively privileged, cozy urban environments where a lot of lateral innovation particularly happens, like where entrepreneurs that have solved problems in other sectors are now starting to look at agriculture. You intuitively think it's about market linkages or just getting a better price for the farmer, removing the middleman, right? And you kind of start peeling the onion a little bit, and you hit very foundational bottlenecks in terms of land use patterns. Mark mentioned the small land holding itself being a barrier, tenancy and the problems that come with it, the dependence on informal loans, that in turn later downstream tie you to the informal money lender in terms of where your produce goes, your access to other markets being cut out because of that. gendered issues, right? I mean, so much of farming happens through women, but so little ownership of property, ownership of land is with women. Foundational issues that keep the cycle of poverty perpetuating, even though opportunities open up, are important to solve as well. So in the medium term, at least, if not in the immediate future, I hope some of the innovation could be directed to these, and that could kind of script a very equitable pathway to prosperity and kind of reduce the inequalities we are seeing across the country.
Thank you all. I think we really had a pretty fruitful discussion. Maybe discussions like this also go a long way, in at least telling people what is out there, what can be done, and how, one takeaway really is how the Prime Minister's pet project of Digital India can really be used to the smallest farmer, because we are already seeing the technology penetration is happening. It's just the access and the enabling that is really needed. More and more people should be actually invest in agriculture. Also, startups need to get their funding as well. We've seen the focus on other MSME sectors. Why not treat agriculture as one and give it the heft and the push that it really needs? But thank you, Anil, Mark, and Sudha for this conversation, and we look forward to more such challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Bye, Sudha.
Bye.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.